We need to talk about ideas, good ones and bad ones. We need to learn stuff about the world. We need an honest, intelligent, thought-provoking, and entertaining review of what the hell happened on this planet in the last 7 days. We need to sit back and listen to the Iron Fist and the Velvet Glove.
What the hell happened on this planet in the last 7 days? That's what we're going to talk about. I'm Trevor, aka the Iron Fist. No Scott tonight, he's unavailable, but Joe the tech guy is a stalwart, a regular. He's loyal to the cause. Joe, how are you?
I'm good evening all.
Yeah. Don't ask Joe how he is. He's got he's got a laundry list of ailments and complaints, and he started talking about needles and stuff, and I was getting queasy beforehand. So,
hey, are you talking about that last week, as in my list of ailments? Had an older friend reach out to me who apparently listens regularly to the podcast.
Right.
So
okay.
I hadn't seen him in about 5 years. We had a catch up today, which was very nice.
And he felt some sympathy for you after hearing all that.
Yes.
Good to hear. In the chat room, John's there. Hello, John. Good to see you. Yes. What are we going to talk about on this episode? I did ask Joe if he had anything he wanted to get off his chest, and he does want to talk a little bit about attitudes to a ceasefire in Ukraine and Russia. Of course, we have to talk about the ICC and its decision to arrest Netanyahu and a couple of others.
What's the cricketing board got to do with that?
Yes.
Is the ICC something to do with international cricketing?
I think from some quarters, the international cricketing something or other would get more respect.
Probably.
Yes. So that's been quite interesting and instructive of how the world's going. And other bits and pieces, we'll just work our way through it. If you're in the chat room and you raise a comment, you've got a very good chance of having us listen and responding to it tonight, because we'll see how we go. James is there. Good on you, James. So, well, Joe, you might as well kick off. You want to kick off with your Perun story?
Yeah. So I literally just watched the end of the latest Perun video, and he was talking about polling in both Ukraine and in Russia, to general attitudes towards a ceasefire. And it seems like the majority of Russians and Ukrainians both want a ceasefire now. However, if you drill down into it and start asking them the terms of the ceasefire, basically the Ukrainians aren't willing to cede any territory to Russia. So short of Russia withdrawing and paying reparations, I think the answer is they're not going to. The other thing that is complicating any ceasefire is apparently the Ukrainian constitution says that Ukraine cannot change its international borders without going to the populace for a referendum. Mm-hmm. So there has to be a referendum on any border changes. So they can't just say, okay, we're going to sign a ceasefire. Here you go, Russia, you have the Donbass.
Right.
Because basically you have to get a majority of the whole country to accept that Russia is now in charge of the Donbass.
Well, they could say, we think our border is over there, but we agree to a ceasefire with a demarcation line here.
And that is also that was one of the other possibilities, and slightly more people were accepting of that with we still maintain that our border is here, but we'll call a ceasefire for the time being. But even so, it still wasn't a majority of people.
I think I've seen that poll, and I think it was something like maybe 55-60% of Ukrainians in favour of a settlement. Mm-hmm. But of that group, only 20% were, let's just quit where we are at the moment, and Russia can stay where it is.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
So as to your question about the willingness of people to fight on, I think even the Ukrainians are willing to fight on, even if they're...
Where'd the poll come from?
High levels of desertion. Apparently this is a number of polls. In there were a number of different polling organisations who have polled people.
Oh, well.
And the same with Russia. a number of Russians who are going, oh, yes, a majority of Russians want a ceasefire, but when you ask them the terms of the ceasefire, they're never going to be accepted by the Ukrainians.
Yeah, they want to keep the territory they've already gained.
Basically.
Yeah, I haven't looked deeply at the poll or who generated it or the polls, but Perun didn't say?
He did, I just don't remember.
Right, it sounded independent.
I think there were a number of polling organisations. The Russian one was a single, I think, polling organisation, but the Ukrainian one, there were at least two different organisations.
All right. Yeah, when you said that you watched the last 15 minutes of Perun and you wanted to talk about it, I thought you were going to tell me he'd found some North Koreans or evidence of them, but so far, no.
No, this was more about how willing Ukraine is, or Ukrainians are, to keep sending people to die on the front line.
Yeah, yep. All right. Well, Joe, Netanyahu. So, according to Dave Milner in The Shot, he wrote a nice article about it. I'll extract a few of his words to sum up what happened. He writes, after 13 months of live-streamed sadistic slaughter inside the open-air concentration camp that was once Gaza, the International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants for Israeli PM Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defence Minister Yoav Gallant. He didn't mention it, but they've also issued arrest warrants for a Hamas official. The ICC cited crimes against humanity and war crimes committed from at least the 8th of October 2023 until at least the 20th of May 2024. The decision was unanimous, and the ruling went on to state that there are reasonable grounds to believe that Mr. Netanyahu and Mr. Gallant bear criminal responsibility for the war crime of starvation as a method of warfare, and that Mr. Netanyahu and Mr. Gallant bear criminal responsibility as civilian superiors for the war crime of intentionally directing attacks against the civilian population of Gaza. And within minutes of the announcement, Israel called the ruling anti-Semitic.
As they do, yeah.
Our Foreign Minister, Penny Wong, she's of the Gravely Concerned Inc., she took to Twitter and issued a characteristically vague statement that assured Australians that international law needs to be complied with, but she didn't specify whether Netanyahu would be arrested if he arrived in Australia. Yeah. So what do you think? Oh, well, and just the whole, Joe. Any objections to the ICC ruling in such a way? Does it seem outlandish or anti-Semitic to you?
No more so than Putin being charged for war crimes in the Ukraine.
Exactly.
I think it's perfectly valid to hold leaders to account in the International Criminal Court. The charge of anti-Semitism, I think, is very much like the charge of Islamophobia.
Yes.
It's a useful tool to silence dissenters. And that's not saying that there isn't anti-Semitism and that there isn't fear of brown-skinned people who worship Islam. I think they're just loaded terms that you can use to bludgeon your enemies with.
Yep. And it'd certainly be possible to be a member of the ICC and come to that conclusion without being anti-Semitic. But, Joe, the really instructive part of this is the international response. So Penny Wong refusing to say what Australia would do, but 8 countries announced they will arrest Netanyahu if he sets foot in their country. And they are Canada, France, Spain, Belgium, Ireland, Italy, Netherlands and Switzerland. So
9 then.
What was that one?
9. UK is also announced.
And the UK, yes. Did they announce that categorically, did they?
They made a statement that certainly suggested that they were going to, because my friends who are very pro-Palestinian mentioned that the UK press had announced it.
Actually, I've got it here. The British government said Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu faces arrest if he travels to the UK, as officials confirmed that London would fulfil its legal obligations as a signatory to the Rome Statute. So I think that means...
Sounds like it to me.
Does, doesn't it? So add them to the list. So what else? Germany said no. And they gave some strange reasons, which I think I'll get to. What else have I got here? And of course, the US response has basically been, this is outrageous, and if any of our allies were to arrest Netanyahu, then they can expect serious sanctions. So
And they've said this in the past as well, haven't they?
yes. So Lindsey Graham came out and said that in response to this ruling. Of course, they've previously said they would reserve the right to send in commandos and extract any prisoners.
Held in The Hague.
Yes. And of course, issue sanctions against the legal team that's responsible for this decision. It's like the first thing they go to on all this is sanctions, 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 the US. Like, they love sanctions. The unfortunate part is that for them, that they've sanctioned Russia as much as they possibly can, and Russia's going perfectly fine economically now. Thank you very much, with the help of China and
They've
Iran.
got rampant inflation.
Have they?
Yeah.
Oh, I think they're doing all right. The economy is.
something percent, I think.
I think the economy's doing pretty well in Russia.
Well, yeah, absolutely. The government is spending shitloads of money.
Right.
So yes, the military sector is doing really well. Prices of wages have gone up because they're paying bounties to get soldiers to go to because they need volunteers because they can't use conscription because that's politically unacceptable.
Right.
So they're paying large wages or large signing up bonuses to soldiers, which means that the factory workers that would be building munitions are now signing up for the large bonuses to go to the front line, which means the factory wages are going up. So yeah, absolutely, the economy is going gangbusters. Unfortunately, it's propped up by large amounts of government spending that who knows if it's sustainable. What happens at the end of that?
I think the economy's going pretty well because they're selling plenty of oil and natural resources. So a bit like Australia in that that's propping up their economy reasonably well.
Probably.
I saw a poll which was asking Russians, speaking generally, to what extent are you satisfied with the life you lead now? And back in, 1992, quite satisfied for the most part was less than 10%, and now that's up to 54%. So on the ground in Russia, I think the sentiment amongst a large part of the population is they're going okay and they're happy enough.
Because the people who weren't happy with Russia fucked off.
Yeah, well, can that many leave?
As far as I know, apart from men of conscriptable age in the last 2 years, yeah, they were free to leave as they wanted.
Yeah, okay. Has there been a mass exodus?
Yeah.
Like how much of the population?
I'm not sure, but in terms of skilled and educated workers, it's been quite high.
Right, in the chat room, John, he saw Perun, thought it was a good analysis. Alison's joined us. Hello, Alison. And John, the ruble is worth 1 cent US. Also, the Russian economy is not as good as you think, Trevor. They're making stuff. The American economy is just financialised. I think some of the fundamentals could actually be better. But we can talk about that another time. The comparison of the economy. Right. So yeah, look, this just exposes the whole Netanyahu-Israel thing. Just exposes the hypocrisy of the international rules-based order, where you've got ostensibly international groups, part of the international rules-based order, saying, got a genocide happening over here and we need to arrest the people responsible. And certain elements of the West are just saying, well, no, because Israel's different and we pick and choose how we apply these rules.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the US has been hypocritical for a long time.
Of course.
Refusing to let their soldiers be tried for war crimes by the ICC.
Yep. But this is a very public one where people can really understand. Like, not many people would have known that the US threatened to arrest, break into The Hague and bring back any Americans that want to. Because it's sort of hypothetical as well. Not many people would know, but this is one where you could, at any point in the future when Americans say we have to uphold the international rules-based order, then just one answer to that is Netanyahu, and you're full of shit. Like, you just pick and choose these rules. It's just the ones that suit you at the time.
What happens if Russia had broken into The Hague to free Milosevic?
Yeah, well, indeed. That's what they, or even threatened to.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So anyway, I think it's just instructive in terms of the world going, hang on a minute, how come I pick up the newspaper every day and there's nothing about this in the newspaper? And how come certain elements are willing to excuse what we know is going on? So, Joe, it's starvation time over there now. Like, they just are not getting the aid in the food trucks. And from what I've been seeing in different things, they're just starving them to death now. It's just horrendous. Mind-boggling that this is going on. Mind-boggling that it's being excused and defended by people like Tony Abbott, Scott Morrison, all those guys coming out as well, as you'd expect, in support of Netanyahu and Israel. And
because of Australia's Judeo-Christian heritage.
That's it. Yeah. I was listening to what's the podcast called? The Guru one.
Decoding the Gurus.
Decoding the Gurus. Yes. What their recent episode is looking at. Jordan Peterson is debating with Richard Dawkins,
right?
And Peterson is just completely nuts, and he is so pro-Christian and so pro-Judeo-Christian
values.
But,
Dawkins has said culturally he's a Christian.
Yes. But I think that means he understands, he went to religious schools.
Oh, absolutely.
He understands the Bible. He's culturally aware of Christianity.
I think also he has inherited a lot of his morals from Christian beliefs, and I don't think he's challenged them. I don't think he said, I don't know if he has a problem with homosexuality per se, but it wouldn't surprise me somebody of his generation kind of thinks it's icky, and that's an inherited belief. It's not he'll feel that it's wrong, but he won't be able to put a finger on why it's wrong, if that makes sense.
Can I give you an example of where Richard Dawkins was very wrong?
Sure.
In a tweet.
He's wrong on a lot of things.
On a tweet on the 13th of November, Richard Dawkins.
Oh, Jesus, his tweets are awful because he's not capable of expressing himself concisely.
Well, this one's fairly concise. I take possibly forlorn hope in the fact that although Trump is a mendacious, malevolent, transparently evil man and stupid with it, Musk is not. Talking about Elon Musk. He is highly intelligent and diametrically opposed to Trump. He has the welfare of the world at heart. This is Dawkins referring to Elon Musk.
Well, yeah, I think there's fairly good evidence that Elon isn't that intelligent.
Yes.
And he managed to fool a lot of the world, and obviously Dawkins hasn't caught up.
And he's got the welfare of the world at heart.
He's got the welfare of his wallet at heart.
Yeah, God, that's pretty... just extraordinary, isn't it?
Look, why are we listening to an old man who's blithering on in his dotage?
Yeah, I guess because at one point we did used to listen to him about other things, particularly his arguments against religion. Hey, he was a bit of a...
Yeah, but his arguments against religion were 20 years ago. He's a senile old man now.
Yes. And you can be right on one aspect of thought and completely wrong on others.
I'm sure his evolutionary biology, not that I'm in any position to critique it, I'm sure it's very, very solid and well-researched. But just because a person is an expert on one thing doesn't make him an expert on everything.
No, that's right. Yeah, people get... Anyway, Decoding the Gurus, quite interesting if you want to be reminded of what an idiot Jordan Peterson is, and there's a discussion there about that and his faith in the Judeo-Christian story as propelling civilization forward. Without it, we would be a bunch of savages. Yeah. Anyway, that was it.
To be fair, the only interesting thing that Jordan Peterson did was that interview with the Channel 4 interviewer, and it was more that he didn't let her put words into his mouth.
Yes.
Him standing up for himself was a very good example of how that's done. But everything else I've seen of his has just been full of bullshit.
Did Barun talk about the Russian missiles?
He did. So he was saying that, so what? They have 50 of these types of weapons. This is nothing new. And they were probably not explosives.
Mm-hmm.
It could well be that these were just purely kinetic.
Yes.
So they're literally just bits of metal that fell because of the speed they were falling.
Yes.
They would have created huge amounts of energy. But saying, so what? Russia have got intermediate missiles. We've known that for a long time. They fire vertically. The speed they're going is purely a function of physics. Really, everyone's going, oh my God, but this is nothing new. This is not a surprise. They've had these weapons for a long time.
See, I heard the opposite,
Right.
that this is in fact quite a surprise. These things were going at 5 times the speed of sound.
I thought it was closer to 10.
Well, that's what Putin was saying,
Okay.
that 10 times. And at that speed, there was just nothing
Correct.
that the West could do to stop
But we know
them.
that about ICBMs.
Well, it seemed that for this category of missile, this was
Okay.
news. So Perun might say it was
Well, he's
Unsurprising.
involved in international arms logistics, so I tend to trust him on that.
What is his involvement?
Unspecified. I think he does kind of government consulting, but to what end and exactly how, I don't know.
Yeah. I'm just trying to see if I can find this quote from somebody highly placed who was amazed by it. But
It was somebody in the US Defense Department, I think. But it was a politician rather than a military person.
yeah. So anyway, okay, Perun says it was nothing. I've heard otherwise. It seems quite extraordinary, something that's going at 5 times the speed of sound.
Certainly there's scuttlebutt in the UK that when Storm Shadow and Scout missiles were allowed to be used, that there have been a sudden number of suspicious packages in public areas around the UK. So
What does that mean?
there was an evacuation at Gatwick Airport,
Right.
suspicious device, and apparently there's been a bomb threat somewhere, and they think this is the Russians.
Okay, but that's totally unrelated to the missile thing? So it's just Russians causing havoc with
This is
fake
Russians
bomb threats.
causing havoc with fake bomb threats in response to the UK allowing cruise missiles, plane launched cruise missiles.
Yeah, entirely possible.
And did you see about the undersea cable that was cut
No.
up in, I think, somewhere between Scandinavia and mainland Europe?
Right.
So an undersea cable was cut and everyone was going, oh, it's the Russians. But actually they're saying that there was a Chinese tanker ship in the area at the time and that they are now monitoring this Chinese tanker very carefully. So, the original thought was it was the Russians, but actually...
But who's saying that?
Whichever Scandinavian country it is that the cable lands in, their
Right.
police force has said basically satellite imagery at the time shows that this large Chinese shipping tanker was in the area and we're keeping a close eye on it.
What would be what would be the reason for China wanting to cut off?
A very good question. Who knows? But, when something suspicious happens to one of your undersea cables, you look at who's in the area.
Yeah. or who was there a month ago and planted a bomb.
Well, possibly. And maybe when they pull the wreckage up from the seafloor, they'll find evidence of a bomb.
Yeah.
There was an article in one of the press talking about the US.
With this sort of stuff, cui bono, like who benefits?
Oh, absolutely.
Who would benefit from that? And you'd be going, well, until you know that.
You're saying it's a false flag? I think the
just
answer
doesn't make any sense. America cutting Nord Stream or blowing that up.
Yeah.
You could say, okay, they did make sense, but it just doesn't. And maybe there is a reason that the Chinese just doesn't seem to make sense.
I grew up on an island that was linked to the mainland via a number of undersea cables, and when there was a big storm in the channel and fishing vessels or whoever would throw their anchor down and then be dragged by the storm up the channel, you could literally go, okay, they cut this one at this time, they cut that one at that time, the next one is going to go in 3 hours' time. You could literally time when the next cable would be cut by a vessel dragging its anchor in a storm.
There you go.
So, there are very much natural reasons, and quite often trawlers will dredge up a cable because they're deep-sea fishing. So there are legitimate reasons, and I think British Telecom had a policy of, if you tell us that you've dragged your anchor past our cable and cut our cable, then we won't fine you. Whereas if we find out after the fact,
right,
and we have to hunt you down, then we will bill you the cost of it. And believe me, fixing an undersea cable is not cheap.
Yeah.
So
John says China just stirring the pot, maybe. Like, why would they want to? At this point in geopolitics, when a large proportion of the world is pissed with the US over Israel and other things, they'd be courting other countries because they're trying to convert the world into a multipolar world. It just doesn't make sense that they would make people.
Again, nobody was saying, that it was deliberate sabotage. All they were saying was they were keeping an eye on this vessel because it was in the vicinity when it happened. And they hadn't rung up and gone, oh, by the way, hey, guys, we snagged your cable. Oops, sorry, it was us.
Yeah. Let me see here. Back to Australia. Now, I'll just see if I've got this. I don't know if I put these videos up. Maybe I didn't. Actually, they're probably. I'm going to try and add a scene here on the fly, Joe. This one of Shoebridge, with a bit of luck, is going to be sitting here. Yes. So I'm just going to.
And you reject the conclusion.
So this is the Greens Senator Shoebridge, who I quite like, and he has been grilling the guy in charge of the National Anti-Corruption Commission, Paul Brereton. So here's him talking to Brereton. So here we go. I'll drag that back. It's from the beginning.
And you reject the conclusion of both the inspector and Mr. Robertson that you failed to appropriately deal with your conflict of interest. You reject that, don't you?
I have said that we accept the finding that there was a mistake of law in the way that I dealt with the conflict.
You said you disagreed with it.
I said I accept it, even though I
You said you disagreed with it, Commissioner. You said it in this hearing.
Okay, we're not going to
Chair,
talk over each other.
I think I've made my position quite clear.
You said you disagreed with it. Do you want to change that evidence, Commissioner?
I do not want to change my position. That personally I disagree with it, but I accept it because I am used to accepting processes, including being found to be wrong.
You see, public officials at every level are expected to appropriately manage their conflicts of interest, and in fact face the threat of a referral to the NAC if they fail to manage their conflicts of interest. And you've just sent them a very clear message that they can be involved in the discussions, can be involved in requests for legal advice, settle media releases, all the way through the process. But if they just step out at the last minute, you as Commissioner will say they dealt with their conflict of interest, and you as Commissioner will see nothing wrong. And do you not accept that that is a very dangerous message to send to thousands and thousands of public servants who have to deal with conflicts of interest?
I don't accept that that's a message.
Well, it's the message you've given today, Commissioner, in rejecting the inspector's finding, in rejecting Mr Robertson's finding, and in trying to justify, as you have continued to do, your deep involvement in this matter, notwithstanding a conflict of interest.
I have said that I do not reject the finding. I have said repeatedly...
You disagree.
Look, we're voting Greens just to keep that guy there grilling wankers.
It does seem
like
to be an argument over semantics. You know, I accept the findings, but I don't think it's right.
Yeah. So he's basically saying that he thinks that conduct
Is
is
acceptable.
acceptable.
Yeah.
And Shibri makes the point, well, if it happens again to somebody else and they come before your commission, they'll
Are you
expect to
going
get
accept-
off.
Yeah, exactly. Because they'll say, well, you did it.
Yep. And you've said that you think you were right in doing it, so you must think I'm right in doing this, in
Yeah,
proceeding
I mean,
this way.
in theory, he could say, well, I think you're right, but the process says you're wrong.
Yes.
Because, you know, you can... The same as, I don't know, if you morally object to people being fined for possession of marijuana, you can say, well, the law says this, so technically you're guilty, but personally I think the law is wrong on this. So I have to find you guilty, but
Yep.
I personally disagree.
Yeah. It's just the worst possible.
Yeah.
This is the sort of numbnut you would have expected Morrison to have appointed to a commission
And I
like
think
this.
for an anti-corruption commission, they're supposed to be squeakier than, squeaky clean. They're supposed to be
Yes.
whiter than white, aren't they?
Yes. There's a good reporter, Morton, I think. I'm just trying to think what his name is. But like this commissioner was saying that, you know, corruption is when people do things, blah, 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 for private benefit. And the actual act says no, it does not necessarily have to be for a private benefit at all. So this commissioner has a total misjudgment of what corruption is as under the act that he's operating under. And
I know someone who actually got off on a large court case because of that.
right,
He lost his bank £10 million.
right,
He was a foreign currency trader, and he'd made some unwise decisions. And rather than reporting it, he hid it and thought he was going to trade himself out of debt.
yep,
And he got himself deeper and deeper into a hole. And finally, he was tried for fraud, I think. And the judge said, well, fraud is if he personally benefited, and he didn't personally benefit.
yep,
And also, I think the defence attorney questioned the bank manager and said, so if he'd made £10 million instead of lost £10 million, would we be here today?
yes.
And the bank manager said, well, no.
Yeah,
At which point the judge said, well, you know, you can't pick and choose just because he lost money instead of winning money. So that was quite interesting.
James in the chat room says, I think they might have put him so they wouldn't get any pushback from the LNP. Would not surprise. So much of what this pathetic Labor government does is to avoid fights with the LNP or the Murdoch media.
Didn't he write some report, or is this a different Brereton?
I don't know.
Isn't there a Brereton report?
There would be. About what?
I don't know. The name comes up in my memory as being related to something.
Yeah. Don't know, Joe. But just a debacle. And, you know, we complained at the very beginning with this National Anti-Corruption Commission how everything was going to be in secret. And it's only because it's such a schmozzle that we're finding out all this stuff. So, So yeah. Hey, I didn't have it in the notes, but the misinformation bill
Yes.
let's die to death. So that's not getting through. But Joe, this one with social media for kids under 16 or whatever is going to get through.
It was the Afghanistan inquiry into the
The Victoria
The
Cross
murders.
guy and whether
Yeah,
there
I
was
think so.
like, is it the same Brereton?
It looks like it. James seems to. Yes, James is saying that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And John
Yeah, sorry.
says,
Oh yeah. Okay.
John says, I've heard in a branch meeting that he was a consensus pick, so he would not be removed when the Libs get in next. That would be so typical. Yeah, and Alison said it's about war crimes in Afghanistan.
Yeah. I thought I recognised the name.
Yeah. I've lost my train of thought then.
Social media.
Yes. That's going to get through. This is what a complete disaster this is going to be for Labor.
Well,
'Cause even though Libs have agreed to it, it's going to be Labor's
implementing it is
baby.
going to be a nightmare. Elmo has said this isn't about safeguarding kids. This is about Australia trying to force people to sign up with valid ID documents to social media so they can track down who says what.
Yeah. It's just going
And
to stink at the next election. And even though the LNP are voting for it, it's going to be Albo's baby.
probably.
Can't believe, it's just incredible that they're falling for this. But there you go. And more evidence comes out from people saying, for God's sake, if you want to protect kids,
Train them, teach them. Yeah.
yeah, media literacy and all that stuff.
Same with pornography. You can't shield kids from seeing it.
Yeah.
The best thing to do is educate them.
Joe, with VPNs so easily accessed, it's hard to imagine that any kid or adult for that matter
Well,
with access to a VPN can't get around this so quickly just
yes.
by locating their
internet
person
traffic somewhere else.
in
Yes.
America or something. And there'll be
But
just
that's
no
what's
way.
happened. That's what's happened to the states in the US with this prove you're over 18 bill for porn.
Right.
People are VPNing. They're saying basically all the traffic from wherever it was, Utah, have just dropped off. But suddenly there's now another 500,000 people in some other state.
Yeah. Like, honestly, it's just going to be impossible. It's hard to imagine anything that could actually work.
Well, it's very much like the government has a list of naughty sites that are blocked by Australian service providers. And they do this by DNS settings. So you just point your DNS. So your DNS is when you type in a web address, it translates into the IP address, the numbers that the computers talk to each other on.
Yep.
And so if you use Telstra's server, it'll hit the block list. But if you use Google's server, it'll work. So all you need to do is update your address, your DNS servers, and you get around the government block. So there is a history of the Australian government doing stupid things like this that are easily circumventable.
I just can't believe there's not enough people in the room saying, guys, as much as you might think this is a great idea, even though it's not, you can't do it. You won't effectively do it.
But this is quite often the case with government experts thinking they know better than people who actually do the stuff.
Yeah. Probably these guys have just never used a VPN in their life.
No, they probably have somebody set up the computer for them, log on for them.
Yeah.
Their password is stuck on a sticky note to the front of their computer.
Yes.
It's the level
Which is password 1234.
well, exactly. It would not surprise me in the slightest.
Unbelievable. Just unbelievable.
Have you seen the Courier Fail, by the way? I think it was the Courier Fail.
I read it every day, Joe, for my sins.
Talking about the 50-cent fares and how Stephen Miles had gone against the recommendations of some expert not to do that.
No.
Okay,
Didn't see that.
I did see a social media post that was saying, yeah, this is basically the social media, this is the Courier Mail softening up the electorate for the Liberals to abandon 50-cent fares,
Right. Okay.
despite it being an election promise.
Right. Okay. That would make sense.
Mm-hmm.
That would make sense. So, yeah. Honestly, you read that rag and you just treat it as an LNP propaganda sheet.
Yeah, very
It is.
much.
That's the only, with a little bit of football and Harvey Norman ads thrown in.
Yes.
Yeah. What else have I got on this list here? Look, I've got just for fun, because I know that you're keen on flat earthers, Joe. I've got some here. Joe Rogan was famous during the campaign for interviewing Donald Trump, and people think that that was a big deal and helped him get ahead. So here's a guy talking to Joe Rogan, and they're basically, this guy's going, all these crazy conspiracy theorists, and starts listing them, and they scoff at them. And anyway, just pay attention, just for a bit of fun.
I get it if you're just completely stupid and you got sucked into this cult thing, but what I don't get is how can you be on the fence about the shape of the Earth?
Well, it's just people that really are not educated. That's number one. And people that believe that there's a collusion that's so large that all of the space agencies from Japan, from China, from Russia, all of them are liars. That all of them are colluding together to hide the true shape of the Earth, because if we really knew the Earth is flat, then it always is connected to some sort of a Bible thing. Like it's the firmament, and they believe that we're hiding the fact that God is real, and somehow there's some mass conspiracy that all these world governments and every person that ever was involved in the space agencies, they've all hid from us.
Yeah, and the moon landing. You're not you believe in the moon landing, right?
I used to believe in the moon landing.
You don't anymore?
I had a joke in my act about it, that before COVID, I would have told you vaccines the most important invention in human history. And after COVID, I'm like, I don't think we went to the moon.
Yeah, I know that was in your, but
Yeah.
you actually think that?
I think there is a less than zero possibility that we did not go to the moon.
Oh my gosh.
I know.
So I did hear that the moon landings were faked, but James Cameron was such a perfectionist that he insisted doing it on site.
Oh, that's good, Joe. So, Joe Rogan and Matt Walsh, they're making fun of those dumb shit flat earthers,
Yes.
and then Matt Walsh wants to make fun of moon landing conspiracy theorists, but Rogan believes in that one.
Have you ever seen Behind the Curve, Beneath the Curve, whatever it's called, the documentary
On flat earthers?
on flat earthers?
No.
It is brilliant. It really is. It's not taking aim at them. It is following them as they try and prove that the Earth is flat. And then, spending thousands on some experiment, and then the experiment showing that the Earth is doing exactly what a round Earth would do. And then coming up with reasons why the experiment failed. And all they have to do is just tweak this slightly. And it's a really good way of introducing positive bias, confirmational bias, as a subject to people, and go, all right, we all suffer from something like this. What is your bias? And just getting people to sit there and critically think, oh shit, if these people are disappearing down this rabbit hole this way, am I using this way of thinking for something that I think is critically important? It's a really good, non-challenging way of getting people to think about their beliefs.
So what's that called?
Let me just quickly
Google that
check.
one.
It's Behind or Beneath the Curve.
And you reckon that's on YouTube?
It's on Netflix,
Okay.
plus other dodgy websites.
Right. Okay. in the dark areas of the web that.
Well, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a good one. There's another podcast. Oh no, Ross and Carrie did a bit on flat earthers as well, and there was one part
Here we go.
where
It's called Behind the Curve.
Behind the Curve. There we go.
Yeah.
That sounds like a worthwhile one. It's good when people treat these people with some compassion, just not completely belittle them. And that's what Ono, Ross and Carey did, I think. And like, I think at one point these people went to some lake and got somebody on the other side of the lake to light a fire.
Train or there's a lake in just outside of New Orleans, which is big enough, and there's apparently power cables that run across the lake, and you can see the power cables curve. You can see the bridge as well.
Right. Okay. And like so the experiment would be to light a fire where the pylon is on the other side of the...
Probably, yeah.
And if the Earth was flat, you should be able to see the fire. And, of course, you can't because of the curvature, and then they come up with all sorts of reasons why refraction of light off the surface of the lake or other stuff. But
behind the curve, they try and fire a laser light along a canal. So they hold up wooden boards and fire a laser along the length of it. And they're going, if I fire it from the first board at 10 foot above the water level, hit the second board at the top at 10 foot above the water level, then if the Earth is flat, I'll hit the third board at 10 foot above the water level.
Yep.
And so they're doing a series of experiments like this. It's fascinating.
John, did you hear about the flight to the South Pole that has been arranged? It's flat Earth nutters going. Okay, so they're going to...
Yeah, but they'll
just say the plane went in a gradual circle or something like that. Yeah.
It's like you can take them up in a plane and show them the horizon of the Earth, the curvature of the horizon, and they'll say, it's distorted lens, it's distorted windows or something.
Yes.
There's always a reason why.
So yeah, that was I had that sitting there and had to get rid of that one.
That was the guy who went up in a rocket, built his own rocket. Because he was going to get high up enough into the atmosphere to see the curvature of the Earth. And I don't know if it crashed or whether it exploded, but he died in his rocket whilst he was trying to prove that the Earth was flat.
Oh dear. There was an article in Crikey. I didn't put a copy of it here to refer to, but it was just talking about Richard Marles, our defence minister, and just what a simple man he is, and totally caught up in the trappings of office, and totally swept up in American stuff and thinks it's fantastic and just swallowing the whole thing. He just sounds like the worst possible person to be our defence minister, but he's in control of the right faction, and Albanese's done a deal with that faction, and he'll be there as long as he wants to. And defence-wise, sending us down the toilet. But yeah, interesting article in Crikey just about the sort of nature of Richard Marles and what a shallow, pathetic human being he is, and the last person you'd want in charge of anything. That was depressing.
That's all right. America won't want us fairly soon.
Well, if we support Netanyahu being arrested.
Oh, no. I just meant Trump's isolationism.
Yes. Yeah. Well.
It'll be what's in it for them.
He wants a war with China. And a lot of the people he's appointing seem to be very hawkish about all sorts of things.
That's true.
So, I don't know if he's just appointed them to have a fight with them later, but if he's appointed them to let them have free reign, then look out, world, it seems.
I've just started watching The Apprentice.
Why, Joe? What?
No, not the TV show. There's a 2024 film. It's a biography of Donald Trump's early days with Roy Cohn, the lawyer.
Roy Cohn?
Yeah. So he was allegedly a lawyer for the mob who was close friends with Donald Trump and fought a lot of his fights in the early days.
Okay.
So they were an unstoppable... Basically, he got all the deals through, and certainly the film is alleging that it was through blackmail that Roy Cohn got a lot of these sweetheart deals for Trump.
And it's called The Apprentice. It's a documentary. And where do you
It's not a
find-
documentary. It's a fictionalized, but it's a biography of Trump.
Right, okay.
So I don't know how accurate it is, but it's supposedly the story of Trump and Roy Cohn.
Okay. Look out for that one as well, folks. What else have we got here? Done that one. I don't know really where to start on some of these topics, just because we're a bit over the shop on this one. We might sort of call it an early evening, Joe, without Scott here. Actually, it might have been, like we're talking about missiles, I might have been thinking about the Yemeni missiles. Because the US had one of their aircraft carriers poised off Yemen, ready to create mischief, and they got bombarded with enough stuff from the Yemenis that they had to vacate the territory for fear of losing an aircraft carrier to the Yemenis. So yeah, and it was one of the US Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment, Bill LaPlante, said last week that the Yemenis operations are getting scary. He said, "I'm an engineer and a physicist, and I've been around missiles my whole career. What I've seen, what the Houthis have done in the last 6 months is something that I'm just shocked." So that's what I was thinking about with missiles, was what the...
Right.
So, on the face of it, Joe, these, large aircraft carriers with very expensive planes on them, in theory, with the improvements in missiles and, firing at them from the land, the risk to the US of losing a large piece like that is pretty high.
If you read the report on the Falklands, that's quite interesting. The US Marine Corps did a report the year after about the war in the Falklands and talking about the risk to the carriers and saying, how the Americans would have gone in with multiple aircraft carriers and had complete air superiority. But saying the Argentinians had access to modern weaponry, even though they were a conscript army. They certainly still had access to what were at the time modern weapons. I'd be surprised if the Yemen have the latest and greatest in weapons, just because it costs a lot of money.
Well, I think people like Iran would give it to them.
Possibly. Maybe if they going, take out an American cruiser, I'm happy to give you a shiny new toy.
Yeah. So scared them off. And, it's been quite a while since the Falklands, and just the improvement in technology for these missiles, I think, is putting large ships in big danger. So, which is what we'll face 30 years down the track if we ever get delivered a submarine. Who knows what sort of underwater drones will be available to, at a fraction of the cost, blow up expensive submarines. But we'll never get them anyway, so no need to worry on that score.
But it's all right. We've upgraded America's dockyards for them.
Yes. Well, dear listener, bit of a grab bag of different things on this occasion, winding our way down for Christmas. Joe, are you around next week?
Yeah, as far as I know.
I think Scott's around next week. We'll find out. So in the chat room, anybody else got anything to say? Alison says it's all Translink transport in Queensland.
Translink. Somebody was asking what the 50-cent fares were all about.
Yeah. Yep. I think that's about it. So,
and John was saying that the reason the flat earthers are going to Antarctica is basically if they're there for 24 hours and the sun doesn't set, then they must be at a polar region.
Right. Right.
Yes.
Okay.
So in winter the sun doesn't rise above the horizon, and in summer it doesn't go below the horizon.
Right. But couldn't they have some theory of a flat Earth also spinning?
Possibly.
which would
But I think-
account for this.
But whatever the model of this particular mob is, doesn't include that. So they'll have to change their model. They won't accept that the Earth is not flat. They'll just update their model.
Yep. There we go. All right. I've got anything else on those that I wanted to do? Oh, I don't think so. I've chopped and changed around to different topics. I'll leave that for the moment. All right, dear listener. Thanks for your attention. We'll be back next week.